everyone. I'm Olga Yarshevsky, Head of Content for Nextchange Group, and you're now watching the Greater Bay Area Blockchain Week special. This discussion is about the evolution of finance from centralized to distributed to DeFi. Please give it up for my amazing panelists here. Gordon Einstein, partner at Crypto Law Partners and recently appointed International General Counsel of the Emerging Technology Association. Gordon, what's about the association? Can you tell us more about it? Just real
Sure. So this is actually the very first time that my son is actually chatting me on Discord as we speak, in case you hear that. But this is the very first time that a nonprofit association has been formed in Switzerland and gotten the authorization of the Swiss authorities to be nonprofit, where it's involved in crypto. It's a pretty exciting breakthrough. It is the legal arm, if you like, of a new DAO, decentralized autonomous organization called the DevX DAO. And if you've been following the news recently, DevX DAO is receiving a very substantial grant from Casper, the new blockchain that's launched 1.6 billion tokens all in all. It's fantastically generous and fantastically farsighted.
Yeah, we've heard about that.
Yeah, it's great. You know, the whole point of this DAO/ETA is to further decentralization by making grants to developers and worthwhile projects. So it's everything I believe in: decentralization, democratization, international cooperation, and we have fantastic local Swiss counsel, Raphael Baumann, who I'm very happy to be working with. But on the international/US side, they needed me part-time to begin with, and now they need me practically full-time. So at some point, I'll probably end up in Switzerland. Right now, I'm camping out in Dubai until international travel and vaccinations and everything else, the quarantines become a little bit more friendly. But yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting news.
Well, congratulations.
Dubai is great. Everyone should come visit.
Don't tempt us. It's still, you know,
You should come visit. You specifically. You must come here. There you go. Okay. Now you're tempted.
I'll do it. Okay. Well, this was a very natural step for you because you've been in the crypto law for a long time now, right?
Well, you know, I don't know how long anyone's been in crypto, and I don't know how long anyone's been in crypto law. I got my first taste of Bitcoin/blockchain crypto in 2014. I can't say that I'm one of those clever people that heard it and all of a sudden all the lights went off. It actually had to hit me on the head a few times before I got it. Maybe just because I got a thick skull after all this time. But when it finally did sink in, I think we've talked about this. I had two powerful twin revelations. The first one, which is maybe the less powerful one, is, wow, this is a new area of law. If I go back into practicing law, because I had stopped, if I go back practicing law, this is an opportunity because all these startups, all these ventures, everything here needs law. You know, it's one thing if they were small or hiding out in Ukraine, God bless Ukraine, but if they want to go international and make a real impact, they're babes in the wood and they need lawyers. So, you know, that was sort of my mercantile interest. But I had a much deeper revelation, which is related to my new profession or new job position, which is, it's not just that these projects need law, but law needs blockchain. Law needs crypto. Like in other words, all the things I had found distasteful or just plain stupid about law and the way that law is practiced, like the idea that you have a different company law for every single country on the planet. And you know, in the United States, you have a different company law for every single state in the country, which is freaking insane. Like, you know, that's like a lawyer accountant full employment act. Like that sort of thing is addressable by blockchain and crypto. And once I realized that part of the reason I had stopped practicing law was solvable by blockchain and crypto, I had to get back in. And I started my switch because, you know, I had a cloud computing company, or have a cloud computing company, but I started the switch, came back full force since 2016 or so, became general counsel of Distributed Lab, you know, our buddies in Kharkov, started this practice and was lucky enough to get associated with ETA. And now I'm very excited because it furthers that mission. Like everything I had found distasteful about law, including in the financial area, which we'll talk about, is addressable by blockchain and crypto. Like the law of finance is going to be deeply impacted by what we're doing. And I look forward to hearing the other guests hear their perspectives. But you know, this is an exciting revolution. It's more than just, of course, it's a monetary opportunity, but it's a freeing of humanity opportunity, which is what I'm all about.
Wow, we'll dive into it later. Okay, thank you. That was an extensive introduction, Gordon. It's good to
expensive or expensive. I'm not charging you by the hour.
Okay, Sam. Now to you. We have Samson Lee today, founder and CEO of Coin Street Partners, an old friend of Nextchange. Hi, Sam. Welcome and thanks for being here.
Hey.
What's
everyone.
been on your desk lately?
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. Well, recently have been a great run, right, for the whole crypto and digital asset space. I think it completely, like, when people talk about like the crypto winter, right, back in 2018, 19, now definitely crypto spring, right, second spring maybe, and more to come. We are very busy, and it's good busy, and thank you for having us. So I'm Constreet and founder and CEO of Constreet Partners. So we are a decentralized investment bank focusing on the primary market. So our vision is to bring the marriage of the traditional finance with all the good things from the digital asset space. So there are good things from both worlds, but I think we can create something even more interesting by merging the two. So we involve in, of course, primary focus on security tokens, digital assets, but we also handle utility tokens or NFT and also other kind of tokenization as well. And we're not involved in secondary market, but we work with a lot of the license exchange as a partnership to send our projects to the exchange. So we serve both the corporate issuer as well as facilitate investor in navigating this new space and the new asset class.
Interesting. I love the term of marriage between two worlds, it's like, bridging and synergies. We're going to talk about it today. Last but not least, Juwan Lee, CEO and chairman of Next Change Group, and our host at Greater Bay Area Blockchain Week. Juwan, good to have you here.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. First of all, I'm glad that we were able to pull together such a great panel. Let me just tell you a little bit about my background, because I find all of this decentralized finance very interesting. I spent 30 plus years as an investor in the centralized world of finance, from Silicon Valley to doing investments in Asia. And I've done it from all angles, from venture capital, hedge fund, asset management, prop trading, family office, crypto investment as well. So watching this all evolve into this decentralized world is really an amazing transition that we're doing, and it's going to impact every level of finance. Let me tell you a little bit about what NextChange does. We are an ecosystem-driven venture builder, and one of the things that we do is we host these large-scale events, and we drive deal flow into our venture building, and we are involved in a number of venture building projects at the moment. So let me leave it at that. Back to you, Olga.
I was mute, sorry. Thank you. So, gentlemen, you all have a very extensive background in finance and investment and law. And just let's start with a little retrospective. What was the moment, in your opinion, for decentralized finance when it actually started disrupting traditional world? Who wants to be the first?
I'll throw something out.
Gordon, go on.
I would argue that Bitcoin is decentralized finance. I mean, it is a store of value. It is distributed. It is decentralized, and it does have a scripting capability. I don't think that scripting capability has been used nearly as much as it could, and I'm not even saying it's worth it at this point. But it was the first. It's subtle, but the moment you got to the algorithmic issuance of money and not money being issued by a central authority, by fiat, you fundamentally open the door to decentralized finance, because you're removing the various central banks and groups of central banks as the center, and those were always centralizing institutions in effect, if not in overt practice. And just to unify this global world, let me take a step back. The US dollar has been in some ways the global currency for a long time, but there's a difference between saying in some ways it is and it being really the global currency, because it's not actually really the global currency. It's just a moment of time where it acted the way for political and economic reasons, and had a certain amount of sway, but Bitcoin is the first real global currency that was decentralized, and I think it just provided a model or example for everything else. And just because we didn't label it as decentralized finance at the time, that doesn't make it not decentralized finance. So that's my controversial comment.
Okay, Bitcoin. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin definitely is a very good example. But Bitcoin have been around for a long time, right? So like 12 years, 13 years, right?
Oh my God, we're so jaded that we say Bitcoin has been around for a long time. I remember when it was only around for 6 years. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I think it really starting, really making an impact to the traditional finance world, or like a general finance world overall, is really after the crash, right? If we all remember, like back in the 2018, there's big crash of the crypto because of the ICO, right? And ICO is really amazing, right? Like it demonstrates the power of decentralized finance, right? All of a sudden, all this startup company can raise fund like never before, right? This is such a powerful cloud funding mechanism it can bring. But of course, there's many issues, right? But before the crash, is really limited to a very limited cloud, right? We often call the crypto cloud, crypto GAN or something like that, right? Like normal people, they don't know anything about it. And Bitcoin before is really more around the gaming communities and things like that, right? So, but after the crash, because of the impact, a lot of the regulator really looking into this space, right? Paying a lot of attention, right? We see SEC coming in, all this regulator from different major financial centers, they all starting to, put up the Howey law and something like that to say, hey, all of a sudden they said, okay, all these token, they can actually classify as, of course, the Bitcoin and the utility tokens or cryptocurrency, and also security tokens, right? And also stablecoin, right? So the regulator really coming in and trying to put a framework into it. And of course, this framework evolved. And then later on, we see sandbox coming up, from different financial centers. And then the financial institution finally, they can see some sort of guideline, right? Although they're still watching very closely, but that really create the start, I think, in my personal opinion, for the financial institution really coming in and looking into this space. So around, from 2018 until now, 3 years now, right? And we see, actually have a fruitful result, right? Because all the sandbox around the world, we see being deployed in Hong Kong, US, UAE, different places, and companies starting to graduate, right? So we see really license being granted, and this whole ecosystem is really become a lot more healthy with all the end-to-end pieces coming into place. So I think it's very exciting time.
Juan, do you want to follow up here?
Sure. What I would like to say is that it's only decentralized finance when you start to call it decentralized finance. Because what we had before, yes, of course, Bitcoin was decentralized finance, but traded on a centralized exchange. And, ICOs were done largely the same. So when you looked at the ecosystem and the purist versus the non-purist, I could tell you, I was sitting on panels where there was decentralized exchanges in 2017, 2018, on the same panel with centralized exchanges. And the decentralized exchanges were novel, interesting, no volume, no business, right? So I look at now as a very interesting period because the word DeFi really kind of started to coin itself, or be more popularly used in the last 6 months to a year and a half, that kind of time frame. And we started to definitely classify certain projects that would be considered DeFi versus non-DeFi. And we don't put, even in blockchain, there are absolutely all sorts of companies that are in the centralized finance part. And now we're carved it out as DeFi. I think the other aspect of DeFi that's very interesting is that it is clearly peer-to-peer. not involving intermediaries. And that's what we need to be focused on. That's my message.
Can I jump in there? I agree. I just think it's a continuum. But to your point, I think the advent of automated market makers was sort of the moment, because that all of a sudden made these DEXs more than just a hypothetical nice try guys, but there's no one there to trade with. And with Sushi Swap and Uniswap and AMMs, when those kicked in, I think it's more than it coincided with the rise of DeFi. I think that's what ignited the rise of DeFi. And yes, there's lots of teething issues, and yes, there's exit scams and all that other stuff. But that was the AMM to me was the key pivotal breakthrough that took everything before, which was an experiment, and actually made it practical. And you can see that in the volume or the amount of value that's locked up on these chains now, or locked up in these platforms. It's like, it's almost, there's this expression like, software's eating the world, where I can say that, automated market making and DeFi and Uniswap like platforms are eating up crypto. It's amazing. It's just an interesting process to watch.
Yeah, so Gordon, your point is exactly what I mean. It only becomes worthy of having a category labeled itself when you actually have a business model that works, right? And what I'm saying is that, yes, there was a pivotal tipping point and the ecosystem wasn't there yet. And yes, the automated, market makers and, allowing for basically volume, which was completely non-existent before, made this possible. And also allowed for those who were in the creative stage of being an entrepreneurs envision what other things can be built. I think that's a very important point.
So Gordon, you have a legal background, right? So how do you see the legal framework around the DeFi space? Like, is it, because I know I see some of the companies, they actually operate as a bank, right? They're lending money, giving interest, and
well, to the extent that there's a company doing that, that's what I would call in legal terms a big boo-boo. You don't.
It's all gonna come to some really crashing situation where someone gets hauled off to jail, isn't it?
Yeah, no. Okay, so I'm having this conversation 3 times a day. Okay, so to the extent that, I mean, it kind of is in the name of the thing, right? If there's a centralized entity that takes custody of your crypto, holds it for a while because it's staking or something else, provides a return, and then sends it back to you. I don't know if that's a bank per se. It depends what you define the involved crypto as, right? If it's not a currency, I don't know if it's a bank. It could just be an escrow service or something. But if it's a currency, that's certainly bank-like. That's a problem. To the extent that this is between anonymous parties by smart contract, or perhaps there's a strong non-custodial element to it, but it's just sort of like on-chain locking or something to that extent, or just a temporary burn even. That's very hard to characterize. I mean, if you suppose the token gets temporarily burnt and then you get more back later. Well, there's never custody, right? And in the absence of custody, I mean, the whole definition of a deposit is that there's custody. But what if there's not custody? Or what if you can identify the party that's exercising custody? What if it's an algorithm? What if it's math? I mean, does math have custody? I mean, who are you going to sue? Descartes. So where I'm seeing, this is going to be very hard to regulate when platforms are launched and they're functional, and there's degrees of anonymity involved, and no one is the boss. It's either run by a DAO or just not run by anyone. It's gonna be very hard to regulate, and I'm of the opinion that's a fantastic thing. I always joke, my goal of going into practice law again was to work myself out of a job, because I want this stuff to take over and kind of be beyond law. Now, there is a very strong issue when it comes to launching these platforms, because there's almost always a centralized moment as they launch, whether it's one software publisher, whether it's the people launching it have a majority or lion's share of the tokens involved or the economic return, or they maintain the ability to evolve the platform over time, which kind of goes through the, someone mentioned Howie, goes sort of the management by others prong. It's the launch part of that's difficult, and that is in tandem with my interest in DAOs, because to the extent that you have this thing governed to the extent it's governance at all by a true DAO, meaning a truly decentralized entity. You know, who's the issuer? Who's in charge? Who are you going to sue? Who are you going to regulate? You know, who are you going to call? So it's just a very, obviously this is a big threat to incumbent regulators and incumbent players. But the whole beauty of decentralization is, okay, you're under threat, but it's a system that's threatening you. It's not a person. What do you do? And it's a fascinating time. Others?
But not all decentralized projects are anonymous.
No, they don't necessarily have to be. Okay, now so suppose Satoshi showed up tomorrow.
Yes.
And the US went, ha, 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 got him, and blew his brains out. Would Bitcoin stop?
No, not at all. And also Bitcoin probably wouldn't have started without an anonymous founder.
Well, interesting question, but it's kind of separate, right? My point is the fact that the founders are known, once the system is sufficiently decentralized and essentially out of their hands, maybe is a threat to the founders, but at some point it stops becoming a threat to the system if it's achieved adequate decentralization. You know, if it's open source.
I totally agree, because it's very hard to build an ecosystem, but it's also equally hard to destroy one.
Right. And what makes it hard to destroy? The whole point of the internet was it was meant to withstand nuclear attack. You know, it literally is a peer-to-peer network where if San Francisco gets nuked, they'll reroute through Los Angeles, and Los Angeles gets nuked, they'll reroute through Utah. You know, that's a whole idea behind TCP/IP, and it's such a beautiful idea and such a beautiful breakthrough. And it's interesting to see decentralized finance as sort of a protocol version, a financial version of TCP/IP, which is, you know, it routes around censorship. And you know, if the internet won't go, you know, if the US invented the internet, I mean, it was all a project of ARPA, but you know, knock on wood, heaven forbid, if the US disappeared tomorrow, the internet wouldn't die. It would just see a hole in the routers and route around it. So that's the way you can get with, you know, with decentralized finance. So, again, though, the challenge is, sure, as an individual, I'm always vulnerable. Like if Satoshi showed up tomorrow, he's always vulnerable. He can be, you know, threatened, taxed, whatever. But I think the goal is, as founders, you want to set something up right from the get-go to be decentralized and to be, my expression with all this legal stuff is, you know, nothing is perfectly clean. You want to be the cleanest dirty shirt on the dirty shirt line, right? So that the regulator attention goes elsewhere. Well, how do you do that? You launch fairly. You launch in a decentralized manner. You fully open source from the start. You don't get greedy, you know, and you get community involvement in there fast, and you don't have a launch entity end up being the entity that runs it. So even if you have a for-profit that's generating the initial code or generating the initial steps or investment, you launch it by a nonprofit association or foundation or a DAO. And then, you know, you kind of take your hands off and say, look, we're just software publishers. You know, the fact that they launched and they gave us some of the tokens is nice, but we didn't make them do it. You know, and we're all figuring this out right now. You know, nothing's super clear, but it's tough for the regulators. I mean, who do you go after? What do you do? You know, the guy who published something a year ago? Okay, that's nice. Good luck.
Well, I can see the benefit to the issuer, right? But isn't necessarily good to the participants, right? I mean, like the reason for the regulator, or the reason they have to regulate someone, is because a service provider needs to be responsible for the service they offer, right? And people participate is protected, right? So the whole logic behind regulation is investor protection, right? It's protecting the smaller guys. So in this case, of course, if it is good and great algorithm, everybody's happy. But if anything goes wrong, right, then you know, what is the safeguard for the smaller guy who participates? Right?
I think I can push back against that a little bit. I challenge the word issuer. If you do this right, there's not an issuer, or there's not an issuer.
Program developer, someone put up the algorithm, right?
Oh yeah, but that doesn't make me the issuer. So issuer is a term of art legally, right? You know, you issue securities, and if you write a book on how to issue securities, you're not actually issuing securities. Right, you have to.
It's not issuing a security, but someone launch a service.
Well, but that's the same with everything. So when you launch a service, maybe that should be subject to some degree of regulation, but that doesn't make it warranting of securities law treatment, which is very restrictive and hard to deal with. If we're talking about someone's going to launch Google Apps or Microsoft Office 365, you're not going to have the SEC or the local equivalent of SEC coming down on them like Godzilla, and nor should they. It's anti-innovative. And I guess to your point about protections, that's the promise and the danger of this area. It is technically complex. It is sophisticated. It's over my head in a lot of areas, but good projects, I think almost every project is open source at this point, and you know exactly the math, you know exactly the code, you know exactly the wallet addresses, you know exactly who owns what, you know exactly what the team got because you can see it on chain, Etherscan or something else, and it's out of their hands quickly. So the only manipulation is manipulation through people who are smart enough to manipulate the algorithm, not people who are using like their insider positions to take advantage of some special knowledge or leverage that they gave themselves. You know, in your traditional company, you know, the managers benefit themselves and the owners benefit themselves and the employees steal. And if you're an outside investor, you know, this is a black box where you have no idea what's going on the inside. And it's also subject to all kinds of machinations, and it's tough. If you're investing in one of these new DeFi platforms, there is no one on the inside at some point. If it's decentralized, there's no one left on the inside who can take advantage of knowledge that you don't have. Like every bit of knowledge is publicly available. Now, do I as an investor have the intellectual chops or knowledge to take full advantage of that? Almost me personally, absolutely not. I'm stupid, right? But you don't have to invest in this stuff, and you're not going to be subject to the same kind of insider trading manipulation that traditional securities are. So if it's a distributed platform that's open source where everyone has access to the exact same information, you know, what's to regulate?
Well, I guess it probably comes to the point whether this algorithm is taking people's money, right? And this come to
so what do you go call up? Give me the algorithm. Hey, you stop.
It's become blurry, right? Because you know when this all started, you know, people don't really care, or the regulator don't really care when things about crypto to crypto, right? They only try to regulate when there's money cross, like turning fiat into crypto, and that's where they set the gateway. But now crypto really become part of the mainstream asset class now. You're taking someone's Bitcoin just like taking money, just like taking cash, right? So I guess the point is when there's a decentralized algorithm being launched and taking people Bitcoin and Ethereum and whatever, I think it needs to be looked at and see like how to protect the smaller guy that, you know, although maybe the algorithm is completely transparent and open source, I understand, but there are people who take advantage. We see like, you know, a lot of like, what do you call those? Like people like, you know, talking on the chat group and, you know, all this social media asking people to buy junk stock.
Okay, so that might be something.
It happens, right?
So the interesting argument. So there's, to the extent that, you know, the algorithm doesn't take anyone's money. You give your money to it if you want to, and you know exactly, or the way it's going to treat you is exactly known in advance. You have the same access to the code that everyone else does. So it's hard to argue that there's manipulation or abuse there, and it's kind of like, you know, do your own research. You know, that's that. The argument you're making about the sort of psychological manipulation is interesting. I think it's a separate argument, but I think that has more legs. I don't know how I feel about that, because it's one thing when someone says, look, I got insider information about Apple, I got insider information about Tesla, I got insider information about whatever's left on the planet these days. You might have a good reason to believe them. And that information asymmetry is fundamentally unfair and something that goes against the idea of public markets, but it's a built-in factor of the situation. When you're talking about these decentralized protocols, by definition, there is no insider information. What does this person possibly know that you couldn't know, unless they're knowing that, like, this other thing is going to invest all in these tokens? Well, okay, I guess that's something, but you still need to use your brain to go, does this actually make sense? So I can kind of see like a fraud action or a regulatory action for someone touting or manipulating the market based on insider information. I think there's less space to do that with these decentralized protocols than there are with traditional entities. Traditional entities are so much black boxes, whereas these are just pure open source. And again, everything I'm saying is premised on the idea that this is an open source network where you have complete transparency into blockchain and who's doing what.
I think Gordon, it's a good point when it comes to DeFi protocols. It's about self-regulation and self-governance and self-responsibility more than centralized ones, right? I'd like to stay with the DeFi topic for one more aspect of it. Do you believe that DeFi actually promotes financial inclusion, or is it just hype and people just use that term for just claiming inclusion when they really, it's not a lot of it?
Well, let me just try to address part of this, because I think there's two very distinct schools of camp. One is that whenever you get rid of the middleman and you do peer-to-peer, you do become more inclusive. I see these kinds of things happening all throughout various different countries. And there is a certain mobile element to it, mobilization through your hand phone. I believe that financial inclusion will be improved, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be addressing the ultra poor people and the unbanked. I want to be clear about this. There are many benefits to DeFi, and they're not necessarily the people who are the unbanked at the same time. So there's kind of two things that we should consider, is that when we say financial inclusion, are we talking about everybody? The answer is no. But I would say that it is allowing for products and services that would normally not be available to the average individual, to be disseminated to them and have access to that through their distribution.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's important. Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
Okay.
No, go
Well,
ahead. Go ahead, Gordon. After you.
No, I agree that the poorest the poor, this unbanked thing is apparently a real problem. That was part of the stated rationale for Libra, now Diem. Whether you believe it or not is a different question. I just to Juan's point, it's more like mobile device access that gets you there as opposed to DeFi. We've seen that in Africa, where they bypassed traditional telephone infrastructure and went straight to mobile with a pretty large amount of success. And you're also seeing it in the Middle East with the Hawala network that's being kind of ported over to mobile. The banks, it's so long as the big issue for like the very bottom tier of people is the lack of proper identification, because it's hard to open up a bank account if you don't have a driver's license, ID, or an address. And so if you're a refugee or you're a migrant or you're a woman that is in a country where you don't have rights and it's all under the guy's name, which I think is pretty rare these days, even in Iran, even in Saudi, it's hard. But you're talking at this point, for better or for worse, you're talking about the bottom 5 or 10% of the world, which is numerically, in absolute numbers is significant, but that layer of unidentified people is forever shrinking, just because technology reaches its tendrils into everything all the time. And it's so, the ability to identify someone biometrically as opposed to by paper is obviously getting better and better all the time. So, the fact that someone lost their password or had it taken from them at some point is not going to be a barrier to identifying who they are and having them access their bank account. Right now you need to go in a bank and show your ID. Well, if they do a retinal scan, then it doesn't matter that you got robbed and everything got taken. You can just go in the bank and access your money. So I think there's technological fixes to that. I just don't think we're there yet. I think, there is a lot of industry talk about it. This will include women, this will include minorities, this will include the poor, blah, 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 blah. Some people really believe that. I think there's something to that, but there's clearly a PR element there. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, can I just add some point? I was just recently in Africa, and I will tell you the infrastructure that, of the number of banks that are available, and you can actually physically walk to them if you're in different locations, is difficult. Okay. that partly that is mobile, mobile apps allowing for you to be able to access banking, because in the future, obviously, your phone is your bank. But at the same time, I would also say that asset tokenization and fractionalization will also open up, various different hard assets to people who would normally not be able to purchase the whole asset. So there are aspects of what we're seeing is that it will start to free up or allow for, smaller, I guess, ticket sizes, allowing for financial inclusion. So there are aspects that's not just marketing, but it will be really available. If it actually addresses the unbanked to the level that the marketing hype is, time will tell.
Oh, what do you
Well,
what
I
do you
think,
think?
yeah, the current banking system definitely not very efficient, right? If you think about the history, the way the whole bank, right, evolve is serve the rich people, right? That's how the bankers start, right? Serving people with money, right? And for people like, came from like a development world or, large cities, we just take it for granted, right? I think I agree with Joanne, like you go to a village, some remote area in Africa, in China, in other places, like, they're not being served by the bank. Banks are centralized organization and they are commercial organizations. They will make the ROI, all this calculation before they open up a branch office, right? Even when they offer online service, like they offer to only a small segment. For example, in Hong Kong, right, the banks here literally punishing people with small deposit in the banks, right? So people have like, less than 5,000 Hong Kong dollars, around 800 US. In the bank, they actually have to
Negative
pay a
interest, right?
penalty, right? And people like going to the branch, for those people, usually like they're less educated, they're not familiar with online banking, and they're being punished because now they cut the number of branches. People go and line up for hours to get deposit and things like that. For online banking, they offer other service, stock trading, insurance, and is all commercials, right? And this is a good aspect that DeFi can bring, right? So don't get me wrong, I'm not against DeFi, although I bring up some concern. But DeFi, I think, with separate ecosystems, separate network, they can actually reach out to many people now not being served by the banks. And how far does that go? By reaching the financial inclusion, I don't know. Depends on your definition of financial inclusion, right? If just allowed them to be able to do some banking and financial transaction, and send some monies, I think this basic financial needs can be served very well by DeFi applications.
Well, I have a question, Sam, for you on a completely separate note. We are talking about a transition into DeFi, and we're going from centralized, distributed to decentralized. I'd like to better understand the interoperability between DeFi and the legacy systems. Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, the legacy system, you mean like the traditional banking system?
Yeah,
like
so,
the
I mean, eventually we are all in one ecosystem, right? And they all have to somehow operate and exist, and money has to be transferred from each and everybody, and it's not going to be two separate systems only. So there's got to be interoperability between the legacy versus the new DeFi system. Do you think that that's going to happen seamlessly, or do you think that's going to be, we're going to have the same conversation 10 years from now that they're talking, we have two separate systems and they're not actually interoperable?
Well, I think the two systems are completely separate to begin with, right? But I'm sure some smart companies or person will come in and provide a bridge for the interoperability, right? But once that happens, whoever wants to also get into the traditional system must operate in a centralized way. So there might be some hybrid solution provider where in the decentralized world, they have decentralized algorithm, but in order to bridge into the traditional world, they need a centralized organization, right? So just to deal with all the banks and the regulator and all that, and But end of the day is about the application, right? I think, the consumer, they don't really care about all this interoperability, the underlying protocol, how it works. Give you an example, just like apps now, right? I mean, like people, they use the same apps, whether it's on iOS or Android, it's just the same app. They don't care how it works. It's interoperability, right?
We have 5 more minutes left, gentlemen. I would like to stay with
Oh, really?
Sam.
Wow, time flies.
Yeah,
Right.
time flies,
Wow.
right?
I like it.
We just touched on like 2 basic topics, and there's been
All right,
45
that will
minutes.
be part 2, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Sam, I would like to stay with you for tokenization topic because it's, I think, looks like one of those bridges between traditional world, financial and non-financial too, given the emergence of NFTs and tokenizing anything, right? And there's a saying that if you even question yourself whether you need blockchain or not, you most probably don't need blockchain. And I think this same applies to tokenization. What's been going on the tokenization field and industry over the past year or two? What's new and what's
Right.
next?
But first, let me address your question about blockchain, okay?
Sure.
Well, people actually need blockchain more than they know, right? But people talk about blockchain more than they should be, right? Because blockchain is the underlying protocol, right? It's like we watch video every day and nobody cares and know about mp4, mp2, all this video codec, right? We use email and internet every day and nobody talk about TCP/IP, which is the protocol underneath. But that's make everything happen. Blockchain is important because it creates a global settlement system for all the asset class, right? It could be Bitcoin, it could be a securities, it could be ownership of a building, right? So we don't rely on centralized stock exchange or a bank to do the settlement, right? This is very important because it makes all the cross-border investment transaction possible on the 24/7, right, environment. So based on this foundation, then we talk about tokenization. A tokenization, basically, a token is almost like a derivative of an underlying asset, right? And it could be any kind of underlying asset. It could be shares, equities, debt. It could be ownership of a building, art, and anything, right? And this derivative form of the asset now be able to trade globally 24/7 and settle on the blockchain, right? So this make it very important because now we make cross-border investment much more easier. When we talk about financial inclusion, it's not about just saving a buck or borrow money. Investment is very important, right? We look at the reason why this world have such a concentration of wealth is because the rich people get richer because they got access to unique investment opportunities, right? They invest in future unicorn way earlier than everybody, right? They invest in a lot of, because they're being served by pirate bankers and all that. So in the tokenization world,
Pirate bank.
can let, yeah, like interesting opportunity can be tokenized and fractionalized and available to any investor anywhere in the world.
Juan, do you have anything to follow up with here?
Yeah, I think asset tokenization is the future. I believe that right now there are missing pieces of the ecosystem. I believe that we haven't hit that point like we've seen where we saw with Uniswap and the decentralized exchanges, where it's really taken off yet. The reason why it's taken so much longer is because of the regulatory framework and other pieces of the whole ecosystem being built. I think the weak points are largely with, where there's a secondary trading market, liquidity. I believe that also the type of investors, the right type of access to investors need to further be developed, and licenses need to be distributed to far more than the few that have been distributed. So once those things get solved, the future of any asset is fractionalization, because you don't need to own a portfolio of companies in real estate. You can own one floor of a hotel. We will find out what will be the optimal type of asset that will be the best for investors, for different strategies that investors have. And we will also start to see, that a different group of investors will be much more interested in assets that would normally not have been accessible, as mentioned by Sam. But unfortunately, in the beginning, it will not be that much about retail investors, because retail investors will be the last to participate, because the restrictions of them losing money and the regulations behind them will be much more strict. Surprisingly, asset tokenization in the beginning will be largely about professional investors, people with $1 million and above, that kind of group, which also don't get the access to the various different assets that the more uber wealthy people that are being serviced by the private bankers, not pirate bankers, are being serviced.
Love that expression.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Confusing.
I like that as well. So my last statement is that the infrastructure will be built, the license will be distributed, asset tokenization is the future.
Okay, Gordon, just real quick, what's the future for digital assets and decentralized world?
I can't argue with what's being said. I guess it's funny you say that, in the decentralized world. It's going to be hard to match DeFi up with real life physical assets, because real life physical assets have title and they have ownership in a legal sense. They don't exist purely on the blockchain, and where possession is ownership, which is generally the way things are on the blockchain. Your keys to your coin. So there's going to be some need to tether these tokens or fractionalized interests to real legal ownership, and that is almost like a traditional exchange where you have a fiat crypto gateway. You're going to need some sort of legal gateway between these tokens and the things that they are purported to represent. It's not enough to just point at, we're seeing these NFTs with art. Like, you can own 1,000th of this Van Gogh, or really, what does that mean exactly? That you own 1,000th of the entity that owns that Van Gogh? You own the bottom right strip of it, like you can tear it off if you want to take it home with you and put it up on your wall. What does that actually mean? There's a lot of problems to be solved here. So yes, everything will be tokenized, but I think that we need to be understanding that tokenizing things is inherently right now a centralizing act. Tokenizing real physical assets that have legal ownership is a centralizing act, because we're reconcentrating on the existing legal system, and that has consequences.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think we just witnessed, a rehearsal of marriage between centralized and decentralized worlds. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your input, for your insights, for your expertise. Enjoy. I think
enjoy Dubai.
Enjoy Dubai. Enjoy decentralization.
And you two aren't here. Come here.
Enjoy 2021. And yes. Thanks again for being with us. That's Greater Bay Area Blockchain Week. We'll see you very soon at our next conference. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.